Hello there, RC Apologist here. Now, I know it's been a while since I have tried to make a video regarding the topic about anything really. I mean, it's been a while since I've been able to try to focus on making the Van Til Thinker podcast in quite some time. So, with that being said, what I wanted to do that would be interesting is to bring about a review of a book that I have read, and it's a book I've read I haven't read it in quite a while, but I've read the full book when I hadn't managed to get it, and I wanted to take some time going over a review of it. Not just simply a review, but one thing that I found that eventually led me to the path of being what is referred to as a presuppositionalist. In terms of the methodology, something that would eventually get me to looking into certain figures, such as John Frame, and then eventually into Bonson, and then eventually into Cornelius Van Til within the later steps. The book here is called Tactics. You see it is by a guy named Greg Koukl. Now, Greg is an interesting guy. I have learned from the particular book, and as you can even see from the back on the review, depending on which edition you get, because I'm not sure how the later editions and stuff have turned out with, if there's new reviews or whatnot, but like Norm Geisler, William Lane Craig, J.P. Moreland, and Sean McDowell have all given it a positive read and approval. That being said, the one thing I find interesting about this book is the notion of how it relays this notion of what he's talking about, the tactics. I've seen some other the Christian YouTubers in the apologetic world, such as what is it called? Wolves Do Apologetics, I believe is the deal. He had suggested the notion of tactics and highly recommended the book. But I viewed this as being one of the examples of a very good introduction into presuppositional apologetics, and here's why. So, if y'all read the book, y'all will know what I'm talking about regarding the manner, and I just highly suggest anyone get this book. But there's a conversation that begins at page 20 regarding the witch in Wisconsin, where he's talking with someone that is a Wiccan witch, and ultimately, he starts asking questions about, the symbols that she wears and what if their religious significance. For instance, because she's a witch and she's a Wiccan, and that it's a earth religion that, like the Native Americans, and they respect all life as a result of that. And then it got him to asking the issue about if she's pro-choice, and she would say yes. And then this gets into the philosophical questions about the topic of abortion and all that sort of stuff, which he starts asking, if it's life, and because she ended up admitting that, yeah, it was life, and if you're a Wiccan, then you respect all life, would that include even the child? And then it started to get to where she's even pointing out, other deals regarding the whole deal, like they're talking about, should we stop them from the abortions? But then she says, things like, well, it's a life religion that protects all life, or respects all life, should she say, so that women should have a choice in that matter regarding the whole deal. And so then he points out the objections with this, but ultimately, as he goes in by page 23, points out that with this method that he uses in the book Tactics, and using the concept of tactics, quote, first, there was no tension, no anxiety, and no awkwardness in the exchange. There was no confrontation, no defensiveness, and no discomfort. The discussion flowed easily and naturally. Second, even so, I was completely in control of the conversation. I did this by using 3 important tactics: maneuvers I will explain in greater detail in the book, which I highly recommend people get, to probe the young woman's ideas and begin to question her faulty thinking. And so he mentions that he starts asking specific questions, using them to begin the conversation, and then eventually using them to point out certain flaws in a certain particular worldview that is not Christian. And then says, I also gently challenged the inconsistent and contradictory nature of her views. On the one hand, she was a witch who respected all life. On the other hand, she was pro-choice on abortion, a procedure she characterized as, quote, killing babies, according to the book and the conversation that he had. That was the words of the woman. And finally, and this is the other part, finally, I tried to help her see the logical consequences of her beliefs. And she said for her, incest was a legitimate reason to kill a baby, but when presented with a toddler conceived through incest, she balked. It had never occurred to her that, in her view, that incest would be a legitimate reason to kill a 2-year-old, and that gave her a pause. So, the noting of these particular things is that with the notion and the conversation about the tactics, it ultimately comes across, and especially from what I've read and what I've seen, is that it's very similar to the notion of the presuppositional methodology. And one of the things that can be noted with it is in the fact that, number one, you're asking questions. This is a common element within it, but it's not the whole how do you know that thing that Psi 10 does, because even as noted in tactics and what we would agree with, this can be an abuse of the concepts. It's pretty much just doing the whole Socratic method that a child would use. But you're asking the specific questions and you're getting into the deep elements of it. And again, that's an element that presuppositionalism affirms and teaches, as opposed to the notion of what we have with tactics. So the notion that we got here. Secondly, even as the admission of the author in other deals where he talks about presuppositionalism, is that he adopts a form of it through the notion of at least not a Bonson or full-on Van Tillian perspective, but rather an off-branch of Van Tillian presuppositionalism that is commonly referred to these days as the Francis Schaeffer notions of it. So the Francis Schaeffer concepts of presuppositional apologetics seems to be more so along the lines of what he is going by in this regard. And so with that, tactics presents a good thing, and it's a concept that I utilize with anyone that I have a discussion with. That is atheists, Muslims, polytheists, and any other sort of group that is out there, and I have engaged in conversations with in the past and even to this very day. So with that in mind, when I say that this is a good book that can introduce someone to presuppositionalism is because, again, even as the author states, there is a form of presuppositionalism that is utilized, but a Francis Schaeffer concept of it. But I would even go as far as to argue, after reading it and how the author goes about pointing out how he uses presuppositionalism, that it is very analogous to the way that John Frame uses it. So a Framian concept that I adopt, that is, that you use presuppositionalism as what is called the normative element, or the starting point element in your apologetic method. And then, of course, you have the issue of evidential views of apologetics in a situational perspective, and then eventually the existential kind of element that sort of Kant and others kind of adopted later on. So those would be elements that we then combine into this form of an apologetic method. But I'd say that one good way to kind of get introduced to that kind of presuppositional apologetic is, again, with tactics. I highly recommend this book to people because it gets you using some interesting techniques that I find good, especially with the whole relation and using the analogy of the Columbo. And that's part of what he also calls it, is the secondary term for his method is called the Columbo tactic. If anyone's seen that show, you'll kind of know what it's talking about by how the detective usually asks questions to kind of catch the criminal in the act and to get them to kind of mess up or to retrace their steps and show where there's a flaw in their alibi or what their case usually is to try to become innocent. So it's usually a very good thing with what is happening with the getting into the driver's seat, the burden of proof by pointing out what the issues are, using Columbo tactics to lead the way. So there's all kinds of interesting techniques that are founded in this book, and whether or not you're a presuppositionalist or you follow these kinds of discussions, I still highly recommend it because it's still a good book. But if you're curious as to why I would suggest such a thing, that this is a good intro to presuppositionalism, apart from the reasons I've already given, then this book is worth it. Get yourself a copy, get yourself a PDF, get the paperback version. I know they did a anniversary edition a while back, so probably also a good thing to try to get if you're interested in especially collecting this particular work. But that being said, yep, I highly recommend this book to get it, and hopefully we'll begin doing the whole topic of the Van Til podcast, Van Til Thinker podcast, soon. I also got another project I'm working on another deal, so we'll see how that goes. But till then, this has been RC Apologist. Y'all take care.